Hello, everyone. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown. It has been way too long since y'all heard from me, and I'm very sorry for that. In this episode, I want to explain kind of the stuff that's been going on. It's been a powerful couple of months, and then we'll talk about the future of the podcast for a little bit from there if I still have time. I don't want this to run super long, so this all starts back in August. Oh, hey, you can see my cat's butt. Hey, Co. What a cutie. This all starts back in August. I was on my way into work one morning and I got into a car accident. A car cut me off and I did not have enough time to hit the brakes before they hit the brakes, and then I rear-ended them. Thankfully, physically, I was fine and I escaped pretty much unscathed. I was even able to drive my car home, but when we reported this to the insurance, the car got totaled, and so I was without a car pretty much through the final week of August, September, and October. Now, initially, this is a problem, don't get me wrong, but it's not a huge problem. Thankfully for me, I had a bunch of friends and coworkers at work who were willing to give me rides. My wife was willing to wake up early to take me into work. Thankfully, for the most part, my wife and I work opposite schedules. I go into work at 3 in the morning and I get home sometime in the afternoon, 12:30, 1 o'clock, depending on the shift. But that meant my wife would be going in somewhere around 11, 12, 1 o'clock herself. So she could not always pick me up from work. And at first, this didn't really affect the podcast at all, because there were several times when I would either be dropped off at work early or I would have to stay at work late, not on the clock, just physically be in the building until either my wife would get off work or someone could give me a ride home. So the last couple episodes of Meridian that you guys already hopefully saw and watched in the lead up to issue 25 were pretty much exclusively written during that era. That was me sitting in the break room at work going, I'm going to be here for 4 hours. I might as well get some writing done. And so the podcast didn't really get interrupted at this point. I would also like to note that during this time period, my wife was pregnant with our first child. So while this isn't a huge impact on my life, I still had become the main caretaker around the apartment. I was doing a lot of the cooking and the cleaning, trying to prepare for the baby and that kind of stuff. So now my life schedule becomes sometimes I'm at work for 12 plus hours, just sitting there for a portion of it, but still there. And so getting home and then having the time to be able to record and edit the podcast was getting a little bit more difficult. We were still managing it, but it was getting a little bit more difficult. Literally, the week after the car accident, the apartment next to ours that we share a wall with caught fire. We do not know what our neighbors were trying to cook in their oven. It looks like they may have put a sealed glass container or a metal thing in their microwave and tried to nuke some hot dogs, because their apartment caught fire. We were all just sitting around the apartment enjoying a nice night. I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 or 3 was on TV. I was on the floor organizing some comic books. My wife's chilling out. And then the fire alarm goes off. So we scoop up the cat, I put on pants, we grab keys and wallets, and we get out of the apartment. And again, thankfully, the apartment did not catch fire. But there was a solid 2 hours there where we were just out in the parking lot of the apartment complex. I think 7 different fire trucks showed up. And my wife's sitting there worried about all of the new stuff that we just got for the baby that we have essentially just in a big pile in our bedroom. I'm sitting there worried about my Fantastic Four comics that are spread out all over the floor, a majority of them inside of an open-topped plastic tote. So if the sprinkler system goes off or the fire department needs to spray our apartment, they're perfectly built to just catch all that water and sit there and soak in it. So we were very worried about that kind of stuff. Thankfully, like I said, we were fine. Our door did get kicked in by the fire department because they had to see if our apartment was on fire, and it wasn't. They fixed the door. The apartment finished fixing the door. That's fine. But that was a whole thing, and then that ate up another day, and honestly, it was just super stressful on top of everything else. The week after that, my mother-in-law got put into hospice care because her health has been fluctuating at the time, and it finally took a really bad dip, and so that's another level of stress that we were dealing with. My wife and my brother-in-law both went down to visit their parents a couple times during this time period, which meant I was home alone. juggling just everything here at the house again. And then the week after that, we had a big hurricane was coming to hit Florida. Um, the At the time, it was one of the biggest that Florida was going to see. I was seeing a lot of stuff on the news that was calling it a Category 6. The last Category 6 that hit Florida, if I remember correctly, was Hurricane Andrew in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I've actually listened to a couple news stories about Andrew and like pieces of historical reporting on it where insurance claims adjusters after Andrew would go to like a site to try and like assess the damage and see how much money they would need to pay out. And they would go to a neighborhood where the house that they're supposed to do was located, and there's nothing there. The neighborhood's gone. It's an empty field. Just buildings, houses, homes, lives gone. Hurricane Andrew absolutely destroyed Florida's home insurance economy at the time. There are whole companies that went bankrupt. Major companies that just like across the nation just pulled out of Florida. They just don't offer home insurance in Florida anymore. Florida as a state had to start offering home insurance because you have to have something, right? But it's still very likely that if you have another hurricane the level and power of Hurricane Andrew, that when it screws up Florida, Florida can't pay for it. These people are just going to be defaulted out of their homes. It's really terrible, and that is what scared me more than anything else. I've been through a couple hurricanes since I moved down here, and don't get me wrong, they aren't a fun time. My first one was a fun time, and then after that I was like, okay, let's take these seriously. But it was still, this was the most scared I had been, where I was like, we are, like, it feels like we're hanging on by a thread right now between all of this crap that's been happening, and then a hurricane's gonna hit. Our apartment complex has a lot of trees in it. Like, it's one of the things I honestly like about it. I grew up out in the country. I did not grow up in like a very city kind of environment, and so being in an apartment complex that's got all of these trees and all of this open space, and it feels really nice and inviting, and it smells good to me. Well, during a hurricane, one of those trees can come down, and if it comes down on your car, then you're not going to have a car. So now we're sitting there worried about what could go on with that situation. And again, we got through the hurricane just fine. Nothing bad happened. Hallelujah, thank God. And then my wife's car crapped out because again, we're driving it pretty frequently in order to get me to work and my wife to work and groceries and all that kind of stuff. And we start noticing that like when you go to turn the car on and you do the part, it's taking longer and longer. We go, okay, it's probably a bad battery. It's been a long time since this car had a new battery. No problem. We'll just get a new battery. I go to AutoZone. Can you test my battery? Test my battery? Yeah, your battery's bad. All right, give me a new battery. That was $250. My brother-in-law goes to put in the new battery with me because he's the car guy and I'm kind of the like, I'll hand you the tools guy. And he's looking at it and he's like, the battery that's in here is burst. Like, there was literally, like, dried, crusted battery acid on top of the unit itself. And so then he tested that, and it turns out, what is it? There was something in there that was regulating the electrical flow, and that had gone bad. So basically, our battery was pumping too much juice into the car, and it fried itself. And so, well, now you can't put the new battery in because you're just going to cause more damage. So what are you going to do? And then we had to find a place that could do this replacement. And of course, we discovered this on like a Friday. Every mechanic shop is closed on the weekend. And then, of course, it's going to cost an arm and a leg because a mechanic's basic rate is like $150 an hour or some crap. So that became a whole thing. We found a guy who was willing to do the replacement for us for a much cheaper price. And even then, we still overpaid him for it. So he's happy, I'm happy. That's great. But so we had, I think, like almost a week. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 days, close to a week, where that car was down and we were calling around trying to figure out that situation. What are we going to do? How are we going to juggle the money? And again, we managed to get it to work, but man, oh my God. That's kind of all the big, terrible stuff that had gone on, if I remember correctly. I don't think there was anything else. The big good news is at the start of December, my wife gave birth to our baby, little Carrie. You may end up hearing her a little bit on the show. I've got her in a bassinet out here with me while Lacey sleeps. She's great. Like, she's hard. Don't get me wrong. This is. Everybody tells you that it's hard, and everybody tells you that it's rewarding at the same time, and I'll agree on that. This is one of the most difficult things I've ever had to go through, but it's also one of the most rewarding. I can't imagine not having Carrie or abandoning her or something like that. Um, she's just a precious little bundle. She's great. She's great. Um, we've definitely had some hard nights for sure. Um, Going into this, everybody tells you like, "Oh, you're just not going to get any sleep," and I'm like, "I'm sure you're going to get some sleep," and you do get some sleep, but God, it's just never enough. It's just never enough sleep. And then even when you do get enough sleep, you've still got doctor's appointments that you have to go to. You have to constantly be doing laundry, constantly be washing and refilling bottles. Um, there was one day recently, this past Saturday, which you guys won't know the date of, but whatever. It was this past Saturday. I sold plasma, came home, and like the whole like anytime I leave the house by myself, I feel guilty for leaving my wife with all the burden of taking care of the baby. And so there's like a ticking guilt clock in my head of like, okay, I've been gone for an hour. I got to get back. I got to get back. And then when I finally did get back home, Lace needed a break, which is fine. So I take the baby and I ended up having the baby like in my arms for like 5 hours straight. She would eat for like 30 minutes and then she would take like what looked like she's going to sleep, and then I'd put her down in the bassinet and I'd be like, okay, she's going to sleep. I'll take a couple minutes to myself. And then no, within 5 more minutes she would wake up and she'd start flailing her limbs and start crying, and it was either she'd wet herself or she wanted more food or she was cold or she just wanted to be held or interacted with. It was just constant. And at one point, like Lace was like, I can take her for a while, and I go, okay, cool, I'll cook dinner. I pass her the baby, I start cooking dinner, and then Lace starts going like, hey, can you do this? Can I hand her to you to burp her? And I'm like, no, I'm frying chicken. Like, my hands are dirty. Like, I can't really hold a baby right now. That kind of stuff has been really challenging. And then she doesn't want to sleep at night. This last night, she had us up till about 6 in the morning, just like kind of passing her back and forth. You take her, feed her, burp her. Is she asleep? Maybe. And then you put her down and she wakes up and the other person takes her. Lace has been a trooper through all of this. She's been great. Um, she is pumping breast milk at the same time as dealing with all the baby stuff, which is just one more additional time sink thing for her to do. So she's just tired and worn out. We're both tired and worn out. I would argue she's probably more than me, but I think she shows it less than I do. I'm much more open. There was one time where I was frustrated and I was telling Lace about it, and she's like, well, she's a baby, she can't help it. I'm like, I understand that she can't help it. Intellectually, I acknowledge that she is a baby, she has a limited set of needs, and we need to acquiesce to those needs, but I am allowed to be frustrated and upset by it. I'm not going to treat her bad because of it, and I'm not going to treat you bad because of it, but I want to acknowledge the fact that I feel frustrated and angry and upset so that I can move past those emotions so that I can take care of Carrie properly and I can take care of you properly. But let me be angry for a little bit and then I'll be fine. Because that for me is a very important thing. I feel like historically for me, going through like teenagerdom into my 20s, I typically put all of my anger down. I'm someone who suppresses his emotions a lot. And I've been in situations where that is not helpful and it's not healthy. And obviously it's not healthy long term anyways. And even if I don't let myself give in to the anger, I do think it's important to acknowledge it and go, I get you're here and I understand why you're here, but I have to let you go because the baby needs to be taken care of. Like, I can be frustrated and upset, but I can't treat her bad. It's the rules. So it's been super challenging, but I can't say it's been rewarding because we haven't really gotten anything from it. But that's not the point, right? Like, you don't have a kid so that it's rewarding. You have a kid to have the experience of having a child, to pass a part of yourself on for all of time and to have this thing. And I love her. She, like I said, it's been super challenging, but obviously that's eating up a lot of my time, and I have not been able to focus on the podcast. And this is something, I think my computer just went to sleep. Give me a sec. There we go. The other thing that's been eating up a lot of time is in preparation for the baby, I have been organizing, categorizing, and digitizing my comic book collection. Obviously, I love comic books. I have a huge comic book collection, and one of the things that I wanted to do in preparation for the baby and needing more space for the baby was get the majority of the collection out of our apartment and into a storage unit where it's everything's listed and everything's cleaned up and organized, and I know where everything is at all times. That way, if I want to read something or talk about it on the show, all I have to do is find the correct box, pull what I want, talk about it, read it. It's great. Perfect. However, I have over 16,000 comic books. It's a lot of comic books. And to digitize all of that in terms of like, here's what I own and the condition it's in and what it might be worth and where it's at physically just takes time. It has literally been taking me weeks to work my way through this collection. I've covered all of my Marvel stuff up to the X books. I've taken care of all of my DC comics. I've taken care of all of my indie comics. I'm literally just left with what I call my big X collection, which is I've tried to create a X-Men collection where, short of some other individual large runs, it's the main spine of stories. So for most of its history, it's Uncanny X-Men, X-Men, and then smaller spin-off books. So Amazing X-Men, Astonishing X-Men. During the Morrison era, it would be New X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and Extreme X-Men, that kind of stuff. I have all of those in one massive collection where it's everything. So if you pick a box and you start reading, you're going to see almost every piece of X history that you can. The only stuff that I've kept separate is, like I said, the really big stuff, like Volume 1 of X Factor, Volume 1 of X Force, Wolverine comics, Cable's first ongoing series, because all of these books ran for like 100 plus issues, and that's just a lot to work into another collection. And to be quite honest, at the time period, those books don't really impact on each other all that much. So it's just a lot. It's taken me a lot of time. I've gotten through almost everything that I own, and it's so nice to be able to say that. But it's just been time consuming. And it became a question of, do I take care of all this other crap going on in my life, or do I produce the podcast? And I chose the other crap in my life. Unfortunately, I do the podcast for fun, and sometimes when I'm super tired and exhausted, I just don't have time for that level of fun. Excuse me, I'm gonna go take care of my baby. And I'm back. As you can see by the shirt change and probably some degree of lighting change for those of you watching this on the video, it's a couple days later. The first half of this episode was recorded, I think it was 4 days ago. It was the day before Christmas. It was Christmas Eve day, if I remember correctly. And it is now the 27th of December. So it's been a couple days, because that's what happens when you have a newborn baby. They just occupy a lot of time. Anyways, I was talking about what I want to do. I was talking basically just about the fact that we had the baby and my time was being eaten up. All of which is true, 100%. No lie on any of that. And I've been going back and forth between what I've wanted to do with the podcast ever since. I don't know if this makes any of y'all feel better, but I have been consistently plagued with questions for myself of just, what am I doing with the show? Am I continuing? Am I stopping? Is it time to take a long break or evolve the show into something else? And I've just kind of let that sit in the background of my mind. I haven't wanted to make a decision, because honestly, the truth of the matter is, I don't want to stop doing Breakdown. I like doing Breakdown. I like talking about the comics. I like sitting in these spaces in my head and looking at all this stuff and sharing it with y'all. I do have a really good time doing it. I wouldn't have been doing it for this long if I hadn't. And so every time I come to the question of, like, should I just stop? My answer is no. The question then becomes, what am I doing? Because I'm not actually doing anything, right? Making the show requires me sitting down, writing a script every week, recording, editing, and then getting that up for y'all. And I just haven't been doing that. I can do that, but I haven't been. So if the show's not canceled and I want to keep doing it, then I need to do something. So, as far as I am concerned, Breakdown's not dead. I'm not quitting. I don't want to go anywhere. That being said, that doesn't mean the show won't be changing at all. I'm not 100% sure what Breakdown's going to be evolving into. When I initially launched the show, I wanted every episode to be a longer, more generalized look at individual series. If you go back and listen to the Heroes Reborn episodes, the first ones that I started with, I'm covering like 6-ish comics at a time in those episodes, and they run incredibly long. You look at my first couple episodes of Secret Six, and it was doing the breakdown for Secret Six that taught me I can't do 6 issues an episode. I'm not built that way as a writer for what I want to talk about with these comics, which is how I settled into the 2 comics per episode, for the most part, way of doing the show, which is fine, and it's great, and I really like the way that typically works out. However, like I said, my writing time has been pretty much non-existent, so I think, for the most part, what I'm going to do moving forward is the show's going to become a little bit more like review-y, where I'll read a thing, and then I'm going to talk about that thing, probably with a lot less research, to be quite honest, probably with a lot less hard, like, miniaturized focus that I like to do on the minutia of some of these. I mean, I guess it depends. If I feel like I have the time for it, I'll do it. But I just don't have time for full scripts right now, unfortunately for me. I do have a handful of things, like I've got a list, basically, of ideas that I've had, or stuff that honestly I've started writing. There are a number of projects that I'd started writing back when the disasters first started happening, that just got derailed because of the disasters. That's just how they worked. But I do have a number of things that are kind of in various stages of progress, that it's just a matter of taking the time to sit down and write it and get it produced. So I am going to keep making episodes. They're probably going to come out at a much slower pace than either of us would like. Hopefully that's okay. And we're probably going to be covering a variety of topics. I've got a sticky note of ideas of stuff that I've been building, or like I said, that I have been working on. Where'd my pen go? So like I said, I have a number of things that I've thought about or I'd really like to cover on the show. I actually have fully written the next episode of Meridian. I've actually had it written 4 months. My hope had actually been to finish the current story arc of Meridian, get to, I think it's issue 25, the issue where Torbull falls, and that would kind of be where we stop on Meridian for a little bit. I'd reached a point where I was kind of tired of Meridian. I wasn't having fun with it anymore, and I was having a variety of issues doing the breakdowns for issues 24 and 25. And so I was like, you know what? I think let's do this. I can talk about the stuff that I think is a little weird for this, that kind of either sets up the next arc or fails to set up the next arc, and then we'll just take a break for a while, and I'll do some other adventures, and then we'll come back to Meridian at a later date. That's still, for the most part, the plan. I do want to at least get that bit of story finished for Meridian, and then, like I said, we're going to bounce around and do a couple other weird things. I want to talk about the Absolute DC launch. Absolute Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman came out recently. At this point, I think I'm 2 or 3 issues behind each of the books. But I would like to talk about my initial impressions and whether I think this is working well. It's selling well, I'll give you that. I do want to talk about Skybound's launch of the G.I. Joe ongoing series and kind of Skybound stuff in general, like where I'm at with it for the most part. I had begun to write up a 4-issue Nightmare miniseries that Marvel had published back in like 1996, might be 1998. I read this comic months ago, and I had actually planned to cover the whole thing in like a Halloween episode. I like, for whatever reason, Halloween episodes are the things I like to do. And so I had planned to do a breakdown of Nightmare for Halloween, and then it's just such a complicated plot that getting the breakdown succinct but also dramatic was taking me a lot of time, and then I missed the Halloween window, and then life continued to throw curveballs at me, and so I've just never finished it. But I would like to finish Nightmare. I want to do a top 10 of 2025. Again, this is something that's been rolling through my head for a couple months. The downside being that I've been so disconnected from comic books right now because we've been so occupied with everything else that, like, last year I just sat down and I was like, okay, what are the books that I'm thinking of the most? And I made a list, and then I just kind of like winnowed down the ones that I liked the best. This year, or at least right now at this moment, I'm just so tired and worn out. And then, like I said, a little bit disconnected from the comic scene right now, that when I go, what are the books I like the most? It's just empty. There's nothing there. My brain can't pull up a list on that one. So what I'll end up doing is I'll probably just go through my shelf of comics that I'm actively buying, and we'll pick and choose, and I'll do the ones that I like the most. I did recently read DC's Doomsday Clock event, quote unquote, series from a while ago due to various reasons, and I'd really like to talk about it. Doomsday Clock is one of those things that I do want to sit down and write a script for, because there's so much stuff to talk about, and I have really complicated, conflicting feelings about it. Y'all know that I like Jeff Johns' writing in general, and I think that he did a great job with Doomsday Clock. There's a lot of stuff that I liked. There's some stuff that I think is weird. There's some stuff that I think doesn't work. But overall, I found it to be a really fascinating read. And so I would like to talk about it on the show. I do think it needs to be like a multi-part series, but it'll be less of a breakdown and more of like a artistic appreciation kind of thing, I think. I do have, this is another thing that I've had written for a while, but I've never moved forward with. One of my friends suggested that I do an episode talking about the paper that comic books are published on. And when he first suggested this, I was like, why would that be an episode? Like, what are you talking about? Who cares? But then I started thinking about it, and there have been changes in comic book paper over the years, and the quality of comic book paper. When Image first launched back in 1993, that was one of the big things that Image was like really pushing for, was high quality, glossy pages, maybe at a higher price point, but obviously one of the things Images was really selling was the art of their comic books. They were an artist-based company for the most part. And so the more I started researching this topic, and the more I kind of like looked into it, the more I went, there's something here. Like, I don't think this is a stunning expose that's going to change the world, but I do think from a historical standpoint, there is something interesting here that does have an impact on the books that you're buying. Hi, Ko. What's up, man? Hello. So I've got that fully written. I have it fully written, and then I contacted my friend, and I was like, is there anything you want to say about this? Because here's the thing, like, don't get me wrong, I do think this is a little bit fascinating, actually. But I'm not someone who buys comics based on, like, the quality of the paper. I'm there for the story. Sure, I'm there for the artwork. But, if you print on high glossy paper, that's great. It's fantastic. I'll take it. But I've read really bad comics that are printed on incredibly good paper that are just really bad comics. And then I've also read really good comics that are printed on like old new style print or modern cheap paper, recycled paper. I'm here for the story. I'm here for the art. The quality of the paper doesn't much matter to me. Is there anything for someone where the quality of the paper was a driving factor, is there anything you'd like to say? And he did record a little thing for me. So I just kind of have to record and put this thing together, and then that'll be done. So yeah, I do. Oh, and then I do want to do, given that so much of my life recently has been built around me categorizing and putting all of my comics in an app and listing everything, I would like to do a video where I talk about how I store and organize my comics. I don't know if this is something that anybody will care about, but obviously it's a thing that I care about. I'm spending hours of my life doing it. I would turn my camera so that you could look at my like workspace where I've got all my stuff spread out. But my webcam is not exactly the greatest quality, if you couldn't tell by the image itself. And turning it's going to cause it to fritz out. But Maybe we'll get there someday. But yeah, I want to do a little video talking about all of that stuff and making, like, having a list of here's all the resources that I've been using in case y'all want to do it. And if you don't, that's fine. And if you do, that's great. Whatever. And that's kind of all the stuff that I've got immediately in mind. I have been reading a variety of weird things in my spare time that I'd like to talk about. Oh, that was one of the things that I've let me put that on the list. I'd forgotten about that. Do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do. So one of the things that I recently picked up that I've been working through while I'm on paternity leave was I picked up Jack Kirby's The Eternals. It is a single volume trade paperback. It collects issues 1 through 19, I think, and then the annual that Jack Kirby did for The Eternals. Ever since I covered Neil Gaiman's The Eternals from the early 2000s here on the show, I've been vaguely fascinated by the Eternals and why they work and why they don't work and what makes them fascinating but also failures at the same time. Eternals never lasts for very long. Very ironic for a book called Eternals. I love it. And in reading this volume of the Eternals, obviously I'm forming opinions and taking in information, but then it also just recently kind of hit me that there's 3 distinct eras of Eternals. You've got the original Jack Kirby's, you've got the modern interpretation with Neil Gaiman's, and then you've got the even more modern interpretation with Kieran Gillen's recent run in like 2019, 2020, I think it was. They did a big war with the X-Men comics for a little bit of time there. And for the most part, I enjoy all 3. There are problems with all 3. There's things that work real well. There's things that don't work well. But interestingly to me, none of them stick around for very long. If I remember correctly, I do think that there's kind of like a follow-up Eternal series after Jack Kirby's run. I've never read it. I don't know anything about it. I suppose there is the Eternals ongoing series that follows up Neil Gaiman's, but that's pretty forgettable, to be quite honest. But I kind of think maybe I'll do like an Eternals trilogy where I'll talk about Kirby's Eternals and then we've got Gaiman's Eternals already and then I'll do Gillen's Eternals. Maybe. It's not going to be fast if I do it, but it's kind of an idea I'm rolling around. And I also have proto episodes for Deathlock, who's a character that I never thought I was really going to talk about on the show, but I've ended up developing a character crush on over the past 4 to 5 years, let's say. I started doing a really deep dive into the character, but I wanted to get... There's kind of like 4 distinct phases of Deathlock's life cycle, so to speak, and I really wanted to get through a solid streak of them. I basically wanted to produce the first part of Deathlock's story so I could start releasing those episodes, and as those episodes were coming out, I would produce the second part of Deathlock's story, and then on and on and on. I don't know if that's something that I'll get to anytime soon, but I'd like to talk about Deathlock. It was a lot of fun reading those comics. So again, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've got rolling around. Let me make sure to put Deathlock down on my to-do list before I forget him again. So like I said, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I would like to talk about on the show. It's just a matter of sitting down and having the time to be able to work through these things. And I have not had the time. I've wanted to. That was actually, while my wife and I were in the hospital waiting for her to give birth, I read Doomsday Clock on my phone, and as we were sitting there in the hospital, I started putting together an episode, beginning to like put together like my thoughts. Here's the things that I thought were fascinating, and here's why, and that kind of thing, for fleshing out later. It is by no means nowhere close to being a fully produced thing, but it's something that I want to get to. But to me, it was more telling that I'm ready to start writing again. I'm ready to start producing a thing again. A lot of my time off here has been juggling problems and keeping the apartment clean. And since the baby was born, of course, part of that's taking care of the baby and not getting enough sleep and still making sure that the apartment's clean, working my way through my collection, all that kind of stuff. And that's been going well. But I've definitely been having that thought at the back of my head of like, I kind of want to sit down and do something again, which is great because I want to. And I want to make the show. Like, I want to make the show, right? I don't want to ever sit down and be like, I guess I gotta make a thing. No, I don't want to do that. That's not what I'm here for. I don't think that's what you folks show up for. I'm here to talk about the things that excite me or fascinate me for whatever particular reason, and that's what I want to share with y'all, and hopefully we have a good time with it. I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about. We talked about the disasters, we talked about the baby, we're here talking about the future of the show. I think that's pretty much everything. So like I said, right now, I do not have a release schedule planned. I do not have a solid plan for what the future looks like. There's going to be more breakdown. I will still release on Thursday. The rest of it, I am going to kind of leave up to the air and my ability to juggle the many tasks that I currently have. If I get an episode out every week, hey, great. Love it. If I get out an episode every 2 weeks, I'm going to be okay with that. And if I only get out an episode a month, I'm also going to be okay with that. I have to be. Because my priority right now is my kid. I've only got 1 week of leave left before I have to go back to work full time. And I do not know what my life looks like where I'm at work for 8 hours a day and then come home and have to help take care of the baby. Maybe I'm going to have a lot of free time. Maybe I'm not going to have any free time. I do not know. So that's kind of up in the air. And then I especially don't know what things are going to look like once my wife has to go back to work, which thankfully isn't for several more months, but still, it's on the horizon. So yeah, for me, that's where I'm at. That's where we're going. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope you had a Merry Christmas. If you celebrate Hanukkah, I hope you had a Happy Hanukkah. I hope you had a happy holidays in general. If I don't put out a new episode before the new year, which I'm skeptical of, I hope you have a happy new year, and let's go into 2025 and do some stuff. Let's talk about some comics. Let's share some joy, and let's have a good time. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.